era of dynamic societal shifts and evolving political landscapes, we find ourselves confronted with pressing questions and intricate complexities about the role of religion, which has become an integral part of the...
A day of discussion on good Muslims and not so good Muslims, on good Hindus and not so good Hindus. This is a day of discussion that we had, and now we come to the last session, valedictory session. Without wasting any time, I request Professor Ashok Acharya to give the valedictory speech. Professor Acharya is Professor of Political Science of Delhi University, and we are grateful to him for he has come all over from Delhi to Kolkata, and he has readily consented to our approach, to our address to him, we request to him to speak, give the valedictory speech.
I am convinced that now I have become a permanent friend of Presidency University. The journey began last year, and I've made many friends in between, and very happy to be back here amongst you all and discussing on such an important topic that touches our lives in the most intimate of the ways. I have been trying to soak in everything that has been said since the morning, because I thought that one of the responsibilities that the person who delivers the valedictory address has is to listen to everything that has been spoken and then somehow try to pull all the strands together. And that's what I've been trying to do, and I've learned a lot. There have been many thoughtful talks and reflections on many things, and for instance, I must tell all our students here who belong to a different generation that what was being discussed are a set of, very conglomerate set of agonies, anguish, the frustrations, the ideological, makeups of mind, that which have been boiling in our minds for a long time. So the students need to, because you belong to a different generation, and your questions are not necessarily our questions, but in many ways you cannot but deny the legacy that we are going to leave behind. A little bit of confusion, a little bit of clarity, and lots of questions reinventing themselves. So this, I think there is a little bit of responsibility on the part of the younger generation here, which I think they can show us with some clarity, in fact with lots of clarity, how they move ahead. So our best of the hopes lie in them, right? You all will agree. Our hopes lie with the younger generation and how they carry forward the society with them. To many of you, you might think, again I'm addressing this to the younger generation, to many of you, questions of religion are not so important in your personal lives. However, you see that all around you. There is a macabre dance of religion and politics all around you at the same time. And in the name of religion, there's a lot of violence. There's a lot of the politics of hatred and so on. But in today's time, if I have to really frame the question for today's seminar, I might want to frame it in this particular way. And I think we are somewhere asking a very significant question. Or rather, we have already thought about it, but we haven't stated them in as clear a language as I think I might suggest. I'm not sure if it completely captures the mood of the house. But the question is religion a threat to liberal democracy? Especially where combined with exclusionary nationalism, it is helping shape and redefining the political discourses and institutions that we cohabit. No wonder, given all the expositions prior to me, we all come to some sort of a conclusion that yes, religion does pose it a serious threat. But how best we counter the threat of religion is something that we are constantly thinking about, and we are looking at it at times through attitudinal, cultural, institutional, and different kinds of responses. And at times you find that even put all of them together, we still don't get the right answer. It's interesting, but also, how have we, all of a sudden, and in a span of 10, 20 years, lost touch with the whole belief in enlightenment and the enlightenment ideals? How have the present discourses, the present political discourses, made us look so inwardly? And all of a sudden, when I was listening to all these very engaged, impassioned deliberations, I couldn't stop myself from thinking that, yes, maybe has the time really come for every citizen to prove that he or she is patriotic? That have we come to that state of affairs where we have to prove that yes, I'm patriotic in spite of my religion? That, I think, is one of the most unfortunate ones. But I will try to look at it. So I was saying that, have we lost touch with the Enlightenment ideals? Long time back, if we did our studies in political sociology, right, or even our sociology studies had a little bit of that political science, that was a generation which was talking about the promise of secularization. That it's an ongoing process, an irreversible process, right? That it's not going to reverse, much like what Tocqueville had said about democracy, that like water, it only keeps flowing. And, so no particular condition can be less equal than the one that has already gone by. And so we always felt that secularization, I'm not talking about secularism, that's a different thing. That's, could be the official ideology of some countries. But secularization is a process where people lose a, a little bit of what we might call a certain kinds of strong religiosity. I do not know if that is happening. I don't want to give examples, but I was in Srinagar recently, and I couldn't speak what I wanted to speak. I had to change my title because I was under surveillance. I'm in a happy ground here in Kolkata, probably, as I was telling my students, probably the last bastion that goes down falling. So I was in Srinagar and I was holding myself back, but then I had to say, but I had to do politics by discussing something else. So, I put up another title, but I did everything that I wanted to do within that changed title. But in a way, I also felt that normal, progressive discussions have been privatized in today's time. We are careful about who we are sharing our ideas with. And we are constantly looking at who's listening to us. And it's even on WhatsApp, we enjoy all the jokes, but we don't share our views. We now think twice about forwarding anything. And I come from a place where no longer academics are invited to valedictory sessions. Delhi University. So, the Pew project recently came up with the view that in the United States, less people are identifying themselves as Christians. And the numbers have gone down from 78% to 63%. 15% less now don't declare themselves to be Christians in the United States. We don't have data for all the countries. But the Pew report highlights on the global values, they highlight that secularization is in a way picking up. But the number of atheists in the United States have grown. You know, if I don't know whether you know this or not, the United States of America is known to be the most religious country in the world. Right? So the number of atheists have gone up in the United States, but it's still lower than all the atheists put together in Europe. But what is the worrying trend is that the number of atheists around the world are now going down. In spite of the little increase in the US, overall in the world, the number of atheists are going down. The major challenge to secularization and to secularism is not whether how religions treat each other, but in my view, correct me if I'm wrong, how many number of people, the non-believers, can stand up proudly and courageously to say that I'm a non-believer, I don't believe in religion at all. I think that will be the real test of any secular country. So, going back to where I started, I think secularization is to be seen as one of the goals that enlightenment had to fulfill, much alongside the one thing that we have all forgotten. You know, the march of science and reason, what you were talking about, scientific temperament. The march of science and reason, that has been completely neglected. There are not just the worrying trends in society. I would add something more to it. You know, religion, society, politics, and academia, some reflections. The academic industry in today's time has been really hopeless. Has been hopeless because I will give you some reasons why I find the academic industry so hopeless. Because my short answer, and I will elaborate it, I will expand it. The short answer is that most of the academics, whether they are believers or non-believers, have all of a sudden become believers in counter-enlightenment strategies. Counter-enlightenment. Counter-enlightenment as a style, as a passion, as an academic style, a new fad has caught up. Whether we talk about, and the first beginning of that counter-enlightenment begins during the enlightenment itself. Not after, you know, but it has become stronger. Those counter-enlightenment strategies and those streams of thought have become stronger over a period of time. I don't want to provoke you, but the name of Foucault might provoke you to some extent, right? So, Foucault, but his predecessor, Nietzsche. You know, he's one of my heroes, but he worshipped heroism. And that was the counter-enlightenment. The moment of the counter-enlightenment strategy is to be seen in that romantic heroism, beginning with Rousseau, by the way. Beginning with Rousseau. So in Rousseau you would see that he's talking about the social contract. He's talking about the general will. He's thinking that the active citizenship is made up of all those voluntary citizens who run to the public square at the drop of the mention of any public meeting taking place there. But towards the end of this social contract book, there are 2 chapters that will give you the goosebumps. One is a chapter on the legislator. So, if there was a social contract, why did we need the office of the legislator? the one who gives the laws. And now you see some such people giving us laws and standing above laws. There is another chapter, and there is a section on civil religion. Where is the need for civil religion? I will come to that. I will unpack one by one. I won't take much time. I will try and finish it. So I will give the short version as soon as is possible. If time allows, I will stretch it to give the longer version. So just to repeat what I had said, that some versions of the counter-enlightenment tendencies are to be found in recent social science research. It is part of that spirit, of that postmodern spirit, where anything goes. It infects even our studies of ethics, morality and all that, where a certain amount of relativism has crept in. Most of you, all the backbenchers, all the few students, you also are relativist in your approach. That's going to hurt you someday, I must tell you. When you say, I don't want to judge, you are leaving many things. So that sort of a relativism, that refusal towards judgment is going to hurt you very bad, and it's going to hurt the society a lot badly. So, postmodernism, whether you talk about postmodernism, but I can give you another hint. Up against the whole claims of reason, and not just alongside postmodernism, we also have a huge skepticism towards reason these days, and more people are engaged in what is called affect studies, or the studies of emotions and passions. It makes sense to some extent. It makes sense to some extent. But it can't ride over reason. It can't ride over reason. If you go back to the original, the proponent of rational choice theory, Thomas Hobbes, for him it was just the reverse. He used passions and the fear of violent death propelled somebody to be more rational. So his rationality was built on very unstable passions and all that, but then he says that probably there is no very stable foundation even for reason to it. But then we learn from our surroundings, we learn from our circumstances, and we learn to go beyond passions and to erect for us a certain kind of a rational structure to which we all agree to lead our lives in stable, peaceful manner and all that. But in today's time, you have many of these affect studies of passions and all that, trying to replace. So there is a political theory of laughter. I can understand the political theory of fear. Right? But imagine a political theory of laughter, a political theory of... So many of these things have been, what do you call them, many of these very potent research things have been trivialized in the name of studies of passions and emotions. They have been trivialized. And that, I think, is one of the biggest disservice that we are doing at this moment to the goals of the Enlightenment. But, there is one, I do not know if you have read this person, but he has written a very good book called Sankar Muthu, Enlightenment Against Empire. He takes into account Kant's work, Diderot's work, Voltaire's work, and navigates through those work to find that the best way, he says somewhere, claims that enlightenment is not about, using a certain kind of a universal, the matrix of universal reason in order to try, steamroll everything around the world. He says that enlightenment probably, and reason perhaps, but an anti-imperialist reason that he discovers in all of his enlightenment thinkers. is necessary. That enlightenment needs to be rescued, needs to be reclaimed. An anti-imperialist enlightenment that sustains human diversity, not just cultural diversity, that sustains human diversity. So enlightenment is it doesn't come to an end, or it didn't come. So there was a phase of enlightenment where some of the ideas, riding on reason, reached a certain peak at a certain point of time. But enlightenment can reinvent itself, and you can give rise to many enlightenments. There can be a better, probably we are at the cusp of another Indian enlightenment. Who knows? And if indications are right, I want to suggest this. I was learning a lot, but I thought that there was a little bit of a despondency and a loss of hope in most of the presentations. Reason being, I thought you were taken in and you were raising your hands up to something that you thought is very difficult to fight. That we are caving in, we are giving in, and in fact I also started with the same opening lines because I was trying to cast a mood. But here is my view. Why do we think religion all of a sudden, aligned with an exclusionary nationalism, becomes a threat to liberal democracy? If you have to go back to the original question. The place of religion in politics, if I have to give you some hope, is in its last death throes. This is when, it's like that Deepak which, lights up brighter before it goes dark. And you cannot just look at the immediacy, the contingency of situations and examples that surround you. There are global trends also that are happening. And the global trends are about a certain kind of a reassertion of that romantic heroism. Romantic heroism stands for both strong versions of nationalism as well as populism. Both of them. Romantic heroism. You see both those versions and many other versions, as a result of which we see a certain kind of a democratic backsliding in the last 2 decades of this century. So many of our democratic institutions have been hit very hard. Why? I want to make you see a different kind of a perspective. Even while individual countries are trying to battle with these kinds of threats, most of these threats also emanate from a certain kind of a, some kinds of contradictions. Even, right-wing politics in many countries has an internal contradiction for itself. There is a little bit of that neo-conservative urge to go back to the past. And there is also the compulsion to move ahead with the times and to have a certain GDP and an economic growth and all. And both of these do not go together. You have to leave the other. You can't be doing this and this, both the ways. You can't be looking backwards while still marching forward. So, this is going to hurt many. And in fact, let me also tell you that some of the first right-wing governments were voted to power not just because people became conservative all of a sudden. Because those conservative parties that came to power, whether it was in Europe or it was in North America, I particularly remember in some of the provinces of Canada, for instance, the right-wing governments came to power not because the people had become conservative all of a sudden. Because those governments were promising less taxes to the people. The lure of low taxes made people, so come next budget and see the temptation for yourself. When the tax rates will be slashed, you will say, oh wow, this is good, I'm feeling good. So the first governments, right-wing governments, were elected because they promised less taxes. It was only subsequently that they felt that they could not repeat their successes. So they had to turn to xenophobia, to an anti-immigration views. And we had to go back and reinvent our past and then to reinvent practically, put back the in order to bring back. But in today's time, and all the damage that had to be done were done after 9/11. Right? And much of that damage, I can't give you the longer answer here, but I'm just leaving it there now. So after 9/11, the damage began. But by then, the writing was clear. But if you just keep the 9/11 out of your purview, you would see that the 1990s was one of the most confusing decade of the last century. We didn't have any sense of certainty during that decade on many issues, on development, on everything. So we were kind of, we didn't have ready answers. Probably the world turned postmodern during the 1990s, I would say. And that ideological confusion of the 1990s has seeped into the 21st century. And on the basis of that ideological confusion and the counter-enlightenment of romantic heroism, you had new political parties coming to play, or some of the older parties that reinvented themselves, new leaders that absorbed that power, became very, very powerful. They came up, and all of a sudden we are talking about populism and democratic backsliding together. Have you ever wondered? We all very beautifully studied nationalism. We say this author says this, that author says this, Have you ever wondered that in that much of that scholarly writing on nationalism, a lot of the contributions of individual scholars on their cosmopolitan ideals have been subdued and have been suppressed. The biggest casualty of nationalism has been cosmopolitanism in much of Asia, in much of Africa. So don't just think about Rabindranath Tagore as a quintessential cosmopolitan. There are many others. The more I read about them, probably, if I have to take another name from Bengal, you would say that he's a Marxist, Rabindranath Tagore. Basically, he's a cosmopolitan. If you talk about his humanism, he was ahead of his time, probably one of the few original thinkers of this country. One of the very few original thinkers. He had a vision that many others didn't have at his time. And part of the strategy that I want to do today is to reconnect with that vision of humanism, which is an Enlightenment vision, which was an Enlightenment vision. But that was picked up by God, and He gave it a different spin to it. But we haven't gone back to Him as faithfully we should, as acknowledged, will pave the slippery slope of a different kind of a problem altogether. So, and it is easily can be accused of being an appeasement of the minority policy. Right? Something that we are all familiar with. So, what do I mean by that humanism? I think that humanism is a bunch of thoughts. I'm imagining Golwalkar here, a bunch of thoughts. But humanism is a bunch of thoughts that come down from Kant, from many other of those Enlightenment thinkers. And a certain, there is an empathy. There is what we give primacy to in that sort of a humanism. Roy is very close to it. Kant is also very close to it. Is what I would call the very basis of human flourishing. Human flourishing in all aspects, in the economic aspects, what Aristotle would have called eudaimonia or human flourishing. Something that is also used by Amartya Sen in trying to tease out a certain understanding of that Aristotelian eudaimonia or that human flourishing. And that human flourishing is also significant for us to understand what the current humanism might look like. A secular humanism is the only ideological force leaping out of the Enlightenment, hoping to be reinvented by new challenges, by new societies in newer ways to counter the threat of religion. And there is one big but here, and that is, if you're talking about secular humanism as an Enlightenment ideal, we are somewhere going past the liberal ideology. We are somewhere embracing a certain kind of a cosmopolitanism. And cosmopolitanism in today's world is a little more welcome. Why? Because there are many global problems that require global solutions that are morally urgent, that must be dealt at the global scale. They cannot be answered by any one particular nation state. Climate change cannot be solved by one country. The question of migration, conflict, disease, nothing. And the present, our own experience of the pandemic also showed that none of these can be solved by any one country. Although many leaders were thumping their chest to say that we supplied vaccines to so many countries. But if you ask yourself the genuine question, how many countries do have the resources to produce those vaccines? What if we stop, and as India did after a point of time, no vaccines for our citizens first. Then we will thump our chest again. So not all the countries in the global south have the resources to produce the vaccines. And so that is a genuine global problem. A country of our size and our own resources needs to stop whining about ourselves all the time. We need to look outward. We need to look at the other, the certain kinds of problems that afflict many people anywhere. I know that if we spin out a PhD out of this topic, we will get a job. If we, so there are lots of vocations that are sustained by these kinds of, research. I accept. But at the same time, I also think that there is a cosmopolitan imperative that is being denied by the new romantic heroism, by the new conservatism. People, so you might ask me a question, what about people? Are they becoming more cosmopolitan? If they are, why are they voting right-wing parties to power? What explains that? That's a little bit of a paradox. A little more study needs to be done on this. We don't have all that material on this. But it's very difficult to predict which way the people are going to vote. If you take that as some kind of an indication. Who had imagined that the Congress would be thrown out of power in 1977? So the people do think, do judge, do vote. And at times they express themselves pretty strongly. So, I still think that beyond the liberal compromise, the cosmopolitan promise and its spread will take us beyond will give us some intellectual weapons to fight nationalism. It cannot be, it has to be, we will have to reinvent the fight of M.N. Roy. We will have to reinvent those kinds of fights. I don't think, we need to have another response through secularism and all that. But the bigger problem, why religion is a threat to liberal democracy, is not because once we resolve the public-private distinction. Much of the discussion that has happened since the morning is about the border issues between the public and the private. What happens in that border between the public and the private? Three things are very important here. Three things. One is the battle for virtue that is spilling over from the private to the public. The second is narratives, how narratives travel between the private and the public sphere. The third is institutions. How institutions in the private sphere then have a bearing on the ones in the public sphere, and also those in the public, how they impinge on the lives. And in many ways, the trouble is that for most liberals who believed that the public morality of a constitution will reproduce itself in the private sphere, the threat is more palpable and more real in today's time when we think, and we shudder to think, that the influence of the private sphere on the public is actually growing, and in a much stronger manner. And also in a very uncritical manner. One of the biggest threats that religion has to liberal democracy is that the threat is to both liberal values and democracy also. Both to the liberal values as well as to democracy. But also, it brings back with it a certain kind of a patriarchy also. So there are all kinds of threats. And so imagine all of this existing in the private sphere and then having a reflection on the public sphere. So as I was listening to, Madhura. As I was listening to Madhura, I knew that she has touched upon a very important theme, that is on the significance of political language. The politics of language, and taken together, the political language of narratives that crisscross the private and the public. As a result of not being able to deal with these kinds of issues, in the 1990s, which I said was a decade of confusion and all that, the communitarians were the first to cave in. And somebody did point that out. The communitarians were the first to cave in, saying that we better acknowledge and recognize the communities for what they are. Right? So they were the first to cave in. And then there were others who started caving in one after another. I somewhere still have hope that many of these border issues centering on questions of virtue, on the transmission of narratives across the spheres, and the kind of institutions that are likely to be reproduced in the public sphere, taking a cue from the private sphere. I'm leaving a lot unsaid here, but you can always very well imagine that our political leaders, the way they dress themselves in certain kinds of robes. Why do they do that? They do that because they say that, they are a sannyasi in power. Do sannyasis ever acquire power? that I am the virtuous self. That person, the first Prime Minister of the country, was a corrupt guy. His family is corrupt. I am the Mr. Pure. So that is a reflection of that virtue, that virtuous thing. And so, through a politics of symbolism, a lot of this virtuous character have made transgressions to the prophets. And then the narratives we have to, somebody did say about the necessity of turning to Gramsci, and of that kind of a common sense based approach. I think it's time that we also have certain kinds of counter narratives. Our counter narratives are best served through an ideology of humanism. But I think, and this is my last point, that even in our struggle against the threat of religion, you know where the real battle is. The real battle is not about controlling the institutions. Oh, no, I won't let this go away. My legislation is getting corrupt. This person is being thrown out of Lok Sabha. That person has been thrown out of, already been thrown out of. In a couple of days, somebody else will be thrown out, and we know who. Right? So, I don't think that is I think the only way to counter what we see today as a threat is the political language that does the talking between the private and the public. In that language, we have hopes to rescue our institutions. And to that, we need to rededicate ourselves. That's all I have to offer. Thank you so much.
Collectively, we thank Professor Acharya for his wonderful speech, thought-provoking, erudite, excellent speech. Before concluding this session, I just want to quote a single line from a poem written by a famous British poet, Thomas Gray. The title of the poem is Elegy on the Death of a Mad Dog. The first line is, the curfew tolls the bell of the parting day. The curfew here means darkness. Darkness, that is, darkness encompasses the land and it rings the bell of farewell to the day. The day is gone, evening has arrived. Just look outside the window. So I think the session should not continue anymore. And I think I can win your hearts. I can touch your hearts if instead of giving a boring lecture in the form of comments on what we have said, if I conclude the session. So let it be so. So let the session be concluded. Thank you very much.